Hello and welcome back to Life on the Wrist. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be jumping into a Longines President Roosevelt that was manufactured in 1955. It's fairly apparent that if you are reading this article, you know that watches were produced as tools. Pocket watches were developed so people would not have to rely on clock towers. Dive watches were made so time could be known underwater to ensure safe descent and ascent while diving. And chronographs were produced for timing things. So when one looks at a watch, especially vintage watches, one can often identify traits of the watch that were built for a functional reason. The Longines President Roosevelt is a good example. As many readers know, Longines produced an exceptionally wide range of watches during their history. They were competing heavily with many very well-respected watch brands and had a large amount of success. This watch is a rectangular-shaped watch that is fairly long from top to bottom, known as the President Roosevelt model. What makes this model extremely unique is the fact that the case has lugs that are hinged. So as you can see as I move the lug, and this allows for the lug to move more flexibly on the wrist. But we'll get into more detail about the case later. This specific model was manufactured in 1955, and it appears that the President Roosevelt model was produced throughout the 1950s. There is some record of these watches being sold in years like 1957 and appearing in catalogs from that same year. The watch has a 10-karat gold-filled case, as seen at the top of the case back there, and the case is quite large, quite long. From top to bottom and sits quite largely on the wrist. With the hinged lugs, if one had a larger wrist, the flexibility of lugs would likely allow the watch to wear more comfortably on the wrist. So what I'm really saying is if from top to bottom your wrist ends kind of where the distinctive case ends, the lugs would hug your wrist quite nicely. But if your wrist extends quite a little bit further, what happens is the lugs can twist up like this. So instead of sitting like this, it can twist up like that and sit on your wrist very, very comfortably. So a really interesting sort of case design for this specific watch. Moving on to the dial, it has a really beautiful square guilloché finishing with applied hour markers and Longines logo. It also has a subsidiary seconds dial at 6 o'clock. The Guilloché finishing was likely done with an engine turning machine, and given the amount of watches that Longines produced during this time period, was likely mass-produced, a mass-produced dial. The overall design of the dial is done to an exceptionally high quality, in my opinion, with very good proportions for the hour markers and subsidiary seconds dial. It doesn't cloud, the hour markers don't really cloud the dial, which I think is really important, and I think it's overall really nicely done. Of course, the markings of this watch is where one can discover so much more interesting things about this specific watch. As mentioned previously, on the case back, one will see the 10-karat gold-filled stamp at the top of the case here, indicating the case material. When one removes the case back, you'll see the typical Longines Wittnauer marking that was stamped on all watches that were sold in the USA market. The movement of the watch can tell us more about this specific story. The watch runs on the caliber 9 LT manual wind movement with an iteration of the 9L movement. The caliber 9L was first released in 1932 and was produced in-house. Longines did not source any of their base movements from a company like Guilloché to buy components to make the movement either. In the 1950s, Longines introduced the 9LT movement, which is the one that is in this specific watch, an updated version of the 9L movement that they produced in previous decades. There were some minor tweaks made to how the seconds complication was driven. The movement got slightly thinner, and some postured the idea that the T in 9LT could stand for thin or thinner, but this isn't really a confirmed piece of information. When one looks at the movement, the finishing really is exquisite. The movement has an incredible chamfered finishing on all of its plates, with gold satin surrounding the ruby jewels. This quality of finishing really is not typically in watches today of this specific price point. This watch today would probably be something like, or at least the price that it sold at in the 1950s was probably something like let's say under $1,000 US dollar watch. And looking at pieces at that price point, you're not going to get the finishing of the movement that you see on this specific watch. On the bridge that suspends the balance wheel, one can see the engraving that reads LXW. This inscription was the import code used by the Longines Wittnauer group when they imported movements from Switzerland to the USA. So it's likely that this movement was put together in Switzerland, shipped and imported to the USA, and then met its watch case and was then sold. So that sort of explains the Longines Wittnauer stamp on the inside case back. It's quite interesting when you look at a profile. You got this sort of domed crystal that sort of matches the design of these hooded lugs, which I think is quite nice too. Now moving back to the case, the last few case markings include the number 400, which is the model number for the case. Oftentimes for the USA market, people will refer to that case model as the reference number, but the case number 400 was used in a wide range of Longines models of this era. As I mentioned, Longines rarely used reference numbers for the watches sold in the USA market, but the model number is often quoted as a reference number. Additionally, one can see the case serial number, which is pretty standard. And then the last marking on the case back is the case maker, and it says Ross. Ross is referring to Ross Watch Case Corp, who were based in Long Island City in New York in the USA, and were active from 1946 to 1985. They produced cases for many brands, including Longines and Omega. Both brands used very similar business models, where they would import their movements from Switzerland to the USA and outsource the production of cases to USA case makers. To see the case stamps and a picture of the movement, I encourage you to go to the first link in the description of this video, where there'll be a link to the article that we write about this specific piece. Interestingly, based on a couple of President Roosevelt models online, Ross was not the only case maker to produce this exceptionally unique and functional case. There are a few other models, some made of solid 14 karat gold, with the same case. Based on some sources online, it seems that these solid gold models had slightly different dial layouts, but were part of the Longines catalog in the 1950s. The one that I was able to find actually didn't have 3, 6, and 9 and 12 hour markers, but it just had the sort of stick hour markers. So not only does this watch have an incredibly unique background in its production, but it also has a case back inscription that adds to the story. So if we flip the watch over, what you'll see is a really cool case back inscription that's hand engraved, and it's dedicated to John T. Broderick, 12/21/62 ARS employees. Now, while the internet is an incredible source for research, identifying the life of John T. Broderick has been challenging. The main issue is the fact that there were many John T. Brodericks living when this watch was likely gifted, and ARS is quite a difficult employer to identify. But here are a few possible matches that we were able to find. It appears that one possible John T. Broderick was born in 1888 and spent his life in Chicago, Illinois. Based on census data from 1950, it seemed that he held the occupation of repairman, so maybe ARS was a repair company, or might have been an employer that he did repairs for. If this is the match, John passed away in 1962 in Denver, Colorado, which was the same year the watch was gifted by his employer. Another possible match is the father of John Joseph Broderick, who spent his life in the Washington and Maryland area. This is a likely match because his father could have worked for the Agriculture Research Service, an agency that works to find solutions to agriculture problems, who is based in the Maryland area. This would then match the ARS one can see on the case back of this specific watch, and would also match the area in which this watch was sourced. It's unfortunate that one can't link the watch to an original owner, but it does provide some additional detail about the watch. The inscription likely points to the sale and gifting of the watch to John Broderick in 1962. Interestingly, the movement was manufactured in 1955, so the watch probably sat unsold in Chicago, Maryland, or a different market until it was purchased by the employees of ARS and gifted to John, which I would imagine that something like this was fairly expensive during that time period with such an innovative case. Again, I really love this watch on the wrist. I think the hinged lugs gives it a very different sort of look to it. I also think that it's really cool to think about the functionality and how really this watch is built for a specific purpose, and I really do love that. Piecing together details is always a curious process. The President Roosevelt was an exceptional example of what Longines was producing during this time period, and being a gift makes the watch even more special. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this really, really beautiful Longines President Roosevelt, manufactured in 1955 and gifted in 1962. It's such a cool case. I really can't underscore how cool these sort of hinged lugs are. The functionality that they bring to this watch are super, super interesting, and I think is a unique part of the history of Longines as a brand, and I think really just watch and case making in general. As always, there will be a article that we wrote about this specific watch on lifeintherwrist.com. It will be the first link in the description of this video. So if you'd like to read about this specific watch and see more pictures of the piece, specifically things like the case back markings and the movement, I encourage you to check out the article on lifeintherwrist.com. Let me know what you think about this watch in the comments section below, and if you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. If you wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help the channel out. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.